Now, the Third International, or the Communist International, was founded in Moscow in March of 1919, and few people seem to realize that the head of that organization was Jacob Schiff, a Wall Street banker from the firm Kuhn Loeb, and his brother-in-law, Max Warburg of Hamburg, was also involved in financing the Russian Revolution, and so Trotsky and Lenin were his agents. And so let's have a look now at Stalin, who was not an Ashkenazi Jew, but a Sephardic Jew, whose parents moved from Portugal to Georgia when he was very young. And he became the next leader, of course, and he was also murderous, and he went into Ukraine and forced the famine that killed 10 million people in Ukraine. And so no wonder the Ukrainian people have no sympathy for communism or Russia.
The Holodomor became one of the biggest crimes against humanity in world history. As a result of Soviet policy in Ukraine in 1932 to 1933, millions of people were killed. Ukrainians were starved to death for their nationality, language, identity, and their denial to follow that communist totalitarian machine, which forcibly led everyone to their fake bright future of communism through blood and torture. On 30 December 1922, a new state was born that united hundreds of nations and cultures by means of military interventions and revolution: the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. Another name for this union was the Prison of the Nations. Communism became a new policy, the new ideology, religion, and culture of this new state, its past and present. And in the meantime, it became an excuse to kill millions of people. As part of its economic policy, the newly formed state set a course for collectivization. Presented as creating heaven on earth, in reality, it turned into a forced organization of private individual farmers into collective farms owned by the state. In a utopian world, this was meant to become a voluntary surrender of people's own land and cattle. People were supposed to pass all that property on to the state, to work collectively every day, and then to distribute the produce among everyone who was working, according to the level of their contribution. The slogan was, "The one who does not work does not eat." But the real motivation of the Soviet regime was to rob and destroy Ukrainian villages. For farmers, their land and its cultivation were the foundation for their well-being. Their families' prosperity depended on that. To surrender their land was to surrender the confidence in their own future and their identity. This meant giving away everything they earned through their hard work over several decades, giving it away to the state, whose values and ideology were completely alien. And as a reward, people would be allowed to exchange their recorded working days for miserable food rations at the end of each year. By 1932, an unrealistic grain procurement plan was set for Ukraine, imposing a quota of 356 million poods of grain. One pood is roughly 16.38 kilograms. This is an equivalent of about 5.8 million metric tons. So you can imagine how unrealistic such an amount was. To officially approve this plan, Stalin's closest associates, Kaganovich and Molotov, arrived in Kharkiv. They were both clearly aware of Stalin's intention to destroy any existing opposition at all costs, especially in use of collectivization. Farmers began to oppose it en masse. They were leaving collective farms, kolhosps, taking back their inventory, cattle, and grain. On 7 August 1932, the resolution on safekeeping the property of state enterprises, collective farms, and cooperatives, and strengthening public socialist property was enacted. This document was better known as the Law of 5 Years of Grain. For the theft of any collective farm property, the offenders could be executed by shooting. Should they have any extenuating circumstances, they could get away with imprisonment for at least 10 years. According to the Law of 5 Years of Grain, people were not allowed to collect even crop residues. During that time, Special patrol brigades went from house to house in a village to confiscate all grain people had. Molotov's enthusiasm had no limits. By 18 November 1932, he introduced blacklists, so-called black boards. If a village entered such a list, it would become surrounded by the army units, blocking entry into or exit from the village, taking away all essential goods from shops such as salt, matches, paraffin, and confiscating any food. In other words, it was a siege in which people would slowly starve to death. The only territories where such a regime was introduced were Ukraine and Kuban, the territories mostly populated by Ukrainians. The resolution of the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party, Bolsheviks, and the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, signed by Stalin and Molotov, isolated Ukrainians by preventing them from leaving the Ukrainian SSR and Kuban to get any grain. During the spring and early summer of 1933, the highest rates of mortality were observed among the local population. Nothing like this was done to any other administrative region or Soviet republic.
Зловісній постанові ЦК ВКПБ і Раднаркому СРСР від 14 грудня 1932